Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. Recently revealed emails emerging from the discovery phase of Missouri versus Biden, a free speech case, show that the White House has played a major role in censoring Americans on social media. That social media companies like Twitter and Facebook intensified their efforts to silence speech and to remove people from their platforms in response to government demands. Email exchanges between Rob Flaherty, the White House's director of digital media, and executives in charge of the social media companies proved that COVID censorship policies were put in place in response to relentless coercive pressure from the White House. Not voluntarily, as the government has claimed. Government's role in social media censorship has been just as bad as we feared, and worse. We also now know that not only the White House, but also the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and other agencies have all played a major role in censoring Americans on social media. All Americans have been deprived by the United States government of their First Amendment rights to hear the entire range of dissenting views. America's founders recognized that sunlight is the best disinfectant, that the cure for bad speech is good speech, and that the cure for lies is truth. Government actors are just as prone to bias, hubris, and error as the rest of us. To dig into this and to explore the unfortunately wide range of related issues, I'm delighted to be rejoined by my frequent guests, Todd Zywicki and Jenin Younes. Jenin Younes is litigation counsel, as you all remember, with the new Civil Liberties Alliance, which is representing the private plaintiffs in Missouri v. Biden. Todd Zywicki is professor at George Mason Scalia Law School and was last on the show exploring whether Chinese-style social credit will be coming to America. Both their impressive resumes can be found on the Bill Walton Show website. So, Todd, you mentioned something about our show and its potential before we got started. What you?
It's right. It's great to be with you again, Bill. And we were reminiscing, if you recall, the last time Jenin and I were here with you was about when I sued my employer over trying to force me to get vaccinated, even though I had natural immunity. And why that's so relevant to the conversation we're having today was eventually, or quite quickly actually, that was removed from YouTube. It was taken down as violating the terms of service of YouTube. And to this day, we have no idea why. What we do know is that the evidence now that's just come out in the last 2 weeks confirms everything we said in that broadcast, which is that natural immunity is at least as protective, if not more protective, than vaccination, as well as the reasons why that was, according to, of all people, Anthony Fauci, who published an article on the failures of the vaccines, as well as an article on natural immunity. And so, but the point is, to this day, that interview we had was removed from YouTube. We have no idea why. We had no opportunity to contest it or anything else. And that kind of shows the scope of the problem we're talking about today.
So does that mean the goal for this show ought to be removal, or
only if we say true things, then it'll be removed.
Well, I think we do. That's sort of the point of what we're endeavoring to bring about here. Jenin, this is the case that you're leading the charge on. Talk about the White House and social media companies.
Yes, so I think when this happened, I believe that was about a year and a half ago, probably the fall of 2021. I think what a lot of people thought was, well, if this is private companies, they can do what they want. And that was sort of the defense of this type of action. And I think reasonable people can differ on whether that should be the case, given that in reality, these platforms sort of control the public discourse. But on the other hand, I am sympathetic to the idea of private companies having their own, getting to do what they want essentially. But now we know that that's not true. And the government was coercing these companies to remove content that conflicted with the government messaging on COVID. So from lockdowns to mask mandates to natural immunity, a wide range of things. And that includes scientists. So in Missouri versus Biden, we're representing Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, who are two of the co-authors of the
Jay
Great Barrington.
Bhattacharya is at Stanford.
Yeah, epidemiologist.
And Martin was at Harvard.
Was at Harvard, yeah. He's on leave right
So
now.
these are
Yeah.
fairly impressive doctors.
I believe Martin Kulldorff is among the few most cited scientists in the world when it comes to infectious disease issues and vaccine safety. So, and he was censored on Twitter for saying that people with natural immunity and children don't need the vaccine. So I think this shows just how ridiculous.
And back in, November 2020 or October 2020, they gathered with our friend Jeffrey Tucker at American Enterprise,
American
AEIR. I have
Institute
trouble
for
with all the
Economic
acronyms.
Research.
Jenin was there too,
Yeah,
so
I
she
was there.
remembers it well.
And they spent a weekend talking about this, and there were like 100 impressive people that created the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yeah, well, it was just the three, Jay, Martin, and Sunetra Gupta, who's an epidemiologist at Oxford. So they wrote it, and then it was very shortly thereafter, it was signed by a lot of doctors, scientists, and then lay people as well. And then sometime after that was really, it was hard to find it through a Google search and that sort of thing, because it was clear that Google had sort of downgraded it. And then at some point, Facebook actually removed the Great Barrington Declaration page.
Oh, wow.
Temporarily, but
So you were involved in this.
In these various things,
Sure.
Well, I was sort of fighting my own fight with respect to vaccine safety, but
With your very able attorney.
yes, with my very able attorney, and Jenin and I guess, had the distinction of being twice removed, since we also did a program for AIER that was removed from Facebook,
That's right.
but on YouTube on exactly the same subject. So it's really quite striking how heavy-handed this was. And as Jenin said, they really, the fact that these were very distinguished scientists raising very rigorous questions was beside the point. And I think, as we saw in the discovery that Jenin came out with, what was it that Anthony Fauci said, that they needed a takedown of the Great Barrington Declaration?
yeah. That actually came out through Phil Magnus at AIER's FOIA requests. Yeah.
So now, well, we were saying this 2-3 years ago. I mean, we were early into this, but now we have proof. And it's, what is the evidentiary? You guys, I'm talking with a couple good lawyers. What's the evidence here?
There's a lot of evidence. So first of all, members of the Biden administration made public threats. That's sort of that was what convinced me that a lawsuit could be brought. So I actually brought an earlier lawsuit called Chengizi versus HHS. It was a much smaller, more limited lawsuit on behalf of 3 Twitter users who'd been suspended for saying things like they don't think masks work or lockdowns work. So the members of the administration, including the president himself, his press secretary, then at the time Jennifer Psaki, the Surgeon General, were making statements saying that the social media companies were responsible for people's deaths from not getting the vaccine, and that they would be held accountable, basically. And they implied it would be through regulatory action or repeal of Section 230, which the companies
Biden said that.
Yeah. Biden said they were looking at ways to hold the companies accountable.
They were killing people.
Biden said they were killing people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So those are obviously very coercive statements. And the government has been claiming.
Well, you wrote about it. I don't mean to interrupt, but I already have. But the Facebook got very defensive, saying, "Well, gee, we don't like being charged with killing people."
Yeah,
and so they responded directly to that off-the-cuff press conference.
Exactly. So the government has been defending these lawsuits. There's the 2 that I'm involved in, Chengizi in Missouri, and then there are a couple of others. They've been saying, no, we were just like making suggestions for the companies. They wanted our input, but these emails that came out in January from Rob Flaherty, who's director of digital media at the White House, I think put an end to that, or should put an end to that.
Is he still there?
Yes, he's still there.
Okay.
Last I checked, like a couple weeks ago, because he's basically he's very heavy-handed. He tells the companies, "You're killing people. I want to see changes. There better be changes. And then they're writing back, tech executives, especially at Facebook and Google, and they're saying, okay, we changed our policies. We're removing more people. I mean, how can you claim that?
And he was relentless.
Relentless,
This went
yeah.
on for weeks or months.
Yeah,
Months. Okay.
yeah. And it's important. So there were another document dump that came out in the Missouri case was from later. So like spring of 2021 on, and these are a lot of emails from the CDC, where it looks as though the tech companies want to be doing this. They're collaborating and saying, okay, how can we help? We want to do this. We want to help, censor vaccine misinformation. What should we be censoring? And so that sort of, in many ways, has been the government's argument that the companies want to do this. We're just helping them. But the fact is that this occurred after these extremely coercive and threatening statements. So against the backdrop of that environment, I don't see how you can argue that the that the companies wanted to be doing this. It's clear that they were responding to pressure from the government and fear of repercussions.
And I want to hear you both on this. You're not saying the companies don't have the right to ban people from their service. I mean, if Twitter wants to throw somebody off, they've got a right to do that, because presumably you can go to Getter or some other sort of, what's Trump's
Gab
that
or
nobody's
Parler.
on.
What's it?
Social, Truth Social.
Social.
Nobody's on.
Yeah, right.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
Right.
Not really.
Right.
And Trump's going to pull the plug on that anyway. But anyway, that's the subject for another day. So you're pretty, you believe in free speech and liberty and companies' right to do things. The argument here is the companies they had a right to do that, but the government didn't have a right to use the companies to coerce private actors to do what the government wanted them to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say that yes is a matter of first principles. Yes, private companies can control access to their platform, but I think it is actually more complicated than this, right? Which is these platforms want to have it both ways, right? They want to claim that they're just a platform, so they're not responsible for what people say on their platform, which is what was argued in the Supreme Court yesterday, if you noticed, with respect to Section 230 of the
I was going to mention that. This is the second, because we ought to talk about Section 230,
Yeah,
because
right.
the Supreme Court just...
Right. And so that's the legal issue, but the principle is we're just a platform, right? We're not, we're inviting all comers. But then they also want to act like they're the Washington Post and say that we can control what is said on our platform. And so from that sense, they're not just like a regular company, because a regular company doesn't have the right to allow people to libel other people, to say the things that are said on their platform. And so, there's a double-edged sword here. So yes, the principle is you can allow private companies can decide who comes or goes, but when private companies decide who comes or goes, they've got to take the consequences that come with that. If the Washington Post prints something that's libelous, then the Washington Post can be sued for that. And what these platforms are trying to say is, well, we're going to control what people say, but at the same time, we're going to pretend like we're not.
In Missouri versus Biden, which court are you in, and when do you win?
We're in the Western District of Louisiana, in front of.
That sounds like a good jurisdiction.
Total coincidence.
Sarah and I were just reading about Andrew Jackson. That's our he's from there.
Well,
We
we're actually in the preliminary injunction phase, it's very rare for a court to order this amount of discovery and depositions for preliminary injunctions, but the judge did in this case. So we've actually been doing preliminary injunction-related discovery since May, and we finally are going to have a hearing probably in the next month or so. So then we'll get a ruling, which hopefully will be helpful.
You guys have actually taken some depositions in the case.
That's
haven't you?
right.
This is the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Jenin, Younes, and Todd Zywicki, and we're talking about a very interesting lawsuit, Missouri v. Biden, which the essence is the White House has been directing the social media companies to censor speech and kick people off their platforms for the last 2 years, ever since they came into office.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that about when this started? It was just sort of like, okay, we're in charge now. Now we're going to start bringing about the regime that we want?
So it's actually that's one of the key sticking points, that the companies came up with COVID misinformation policies in March of 2020. And so the government is arguing, well, they already had these misinformation policies.
But they were listening to Fauci. The social media
Oh,
companies.
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
you still had the same people in charge of,
Sure. So they were doing some of this even when Trump was in charge. The CDC especially was sort of on its own. I doubt that the president had anything to do with that.
So we had Twitter being leaned, it was a Facebook mainly being leaned on
All
by
of them.
all of them.
Yeah.
But then we had Fauci doing that. We had the FBI. I understand we
Yeah.
had 20 FBI agents in the Twitter offices.
Yeah. That's right.
Just at Twitter, who knows that Facebook and the
Yeah.
like.
So were the government people talking to each other? Or was this just all independent action?
That remains a little bit unclear. It looks to me like they were acting independently. The separate agencies. I don't think that they were coordinating. So I think that's why the CDC was doing this even under Trump and just continued doing it under Biden, but ramped up its efforts in response to the government's pressure. And then I think some of it, like the White House's involvement, obviously started under Biden.
So when you win, what's the remedy? What's the what are the damages?
So we're actually not suing for damages right now, although that could change. We're asking for declaratory and injunctive relief. So we basically want a court to say, yeah,
sounds dramatic. What does that mean?
We need a court to say that the government can't do this. It cannot coerce or pressure or
In the
work with the
future.
companies. Yeah. And that constitutes a First Amendment violation. It's really important to create that precedent.
And this would set a standard, and then they'd appeal it and take it to the Supreme Court.
I think that's likely. Yeah. I mean,
So this could be the case that opens all this up.
I think so. I think it's likely to be the case that sort of sets these boundaries. And it's obviously new because this has just never happened before. So we've never had, social media is pretty new in and of itself. And then the government, using social media companies to accomplish its aims to this degree. Although I think there was some of it going on before.
That's my guess, right? But
Yeah.
not to
What do
this
you've been
pervasive
in this world? What's your take? I mean, this has been going on for a while.
That's my guess. I mean, first, it's pretty amazing. It's like I'm glad the FBI was able to spare people, FBI agents spying on parents going to PTA meetings to allow them instead to read all of our social media postings and the like.
So you're an FBI, you get a call. Am I going to the parents' night or am I going to the offices of Twitter?
That's right. I
The
think we
food's a lot better at Twitter.
That's right. I think we just uncovered the cause of the crime spree in America. Is they didn't have any agents left over. Yeah, but this is, what I think is striking about this bill is this has probably been going on in the past. We know, for example, during times of war, the government has always leaned on media companies not to print things that could affect national defense and that sort of thing. But this is so brazen and on a scale that I think really is novel. And, that the heavy-handedness, the pure ideological discrimination of it. So, for example, July 2021, President Biden in a town hall said to people, if you get vaccinated, you will not get COVID, right? That was 100% misinformation, right? Everybody knew by that time that you could, if you got vaccinated, you could still get COVID. Yet Joe Biden wasn't banned from Twitter for having that statement be put on Twitter, right? So it was clearly ideologically motivated. Didn't have anything to do with national defense or the kind of things that we talked about in the past. And what I think we're seeing here is this administration, the left generally, is trying to figure out where the line is, right? We've always thought in terms of state action, censorship versus private action. And what they're doing now is using the power of the government to lean on these guys, to talk to these guys. And don't forget that at the same time they're doing this over here, they're also holding hearings over here. Is Twitter a monopolist? Should we be bringing an antitrust action against Twitter? Should we bring an antitrust action against Facebook? FTC is investigating Facebook for privacy issues and all these sorts of things. And so in the world of the regulatory state, these comments are not in isolation. They're against this backdrop of all these other threats.
And your organization, Jenin, is really every day up against the administrative state and dealing with it. But you mentioned a line to this man on the street who's not a lawyer. I don't think they care about a line. I think they're just pushing it as far as they can to get away with it, but they can as long as they've got the power. I mean, are they really dealing with any niceties of the law? Is Merrick Garland really concerned about it?
Well, I think if they, I think they know.
I don't
that
mind if the show gets kicked off. I don't want you guys to get debarred.
Well, but I think the point is, Bill, they know that they couldn't just pass a regulation or an executive order that says the following content must be banned from your site.
Right.
Right. That would be a clear violation of the First Amendment because it would be content-based discrimination as a matter of state action. State action is the magic word here, which is when the government acts versus just a determination by the private actors. And so they're not going to pass a regulation, right? They're not going to issue an executive order. They're not going to pass a law. But what they're going to do is use all this soft power, all this sort
the
of
social
pressure.
media companies.
Social, the government on the social media companies.
Who tend to agree with the government on these issues anyway.
Right. And so, yes, exactly. And so in the past, what you've had in a case like the Pentagon Papers case, a famous case during the Vietnam War, was the government just said, we will prosecute you if you publish those, right? We will prosecute you criminally if you say the following things. And that's always been protected, barred by the First Amendment, except for these small exceptions for libel, for, creating a riot, that sort of thing. And so what they understand now is they can't do that, but they also understand they don't need to do that.
That's right.
And when I say they, I mean the government here, that the government doesn't need to actually pass laws to get what they want.
But the things we believed 2 years ago was that the lockdowns were not helpful, they were hurtful. The masks didn't really, they were decorative, but they didn't really stop this virus. Then later on, the vaccine, which is not really a vaccine, which was purported to do all this good stuff, really doesn't. And in fact, a lot of evidence that it does harm. And I think Jay back in that day said something very true, that he said, well, this vaccine, you might want to use it for an older population, but you don't want to use it for everybody, especially kids. And that got banned. And that got canceled. So it seems like almost everything everybody was saying 2 years ago we now know to be true.
Yeah, that's right.
Am I missing anything? Is there any gray area that we're still?
That's the joke now, right? Which is, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality? About 3 months.
I think that this sort of illustrates the purpose of the First Amendment, or why we have a First Amendment, because the government, isn't this, I think a lot of people think, oh, there are these, gods in the government who are just infallible and they know what's true and what's not, and they should be removing the microchip people and stuff like that. But actually what happens in reality, it's just human beings in government, and often not the smartest human beings actually, who are just, they have their own biases and often don't want to admit error. And those are the people making these decisions. And then you end up with, some or people at Twitter, or a combination of those things. Some 22-year-old who got a liberal arts degree somewhere is censoring Jay Bhattacharya and Mike Kuldorf, who are top epidemiologists, talking about things in the area of their expertise, and that really strangled public debate on these topics. So there was the notion that the public got the impression there was a consensus on lockdowns, mandates, the vaccines, when there actually wasn't. It was just that scientists who disagreed were being silenced.
Did you listen to Naomi Wolf's podcast on this yesterday?
No.
2 days ago?
No.
It's stunning. She's very accomplished. What does she have? Like two PhDs, a couple of doctorates, gotten all this, done this incredible career. And she said she watched the Twitter hearings and looked at the people who were censoring her. And the people who ruined her, and they're these, what do you call it, 22-year-old graduate of Michigan
studies.
State. With all due respect to Michigan State, I went to Indiana, but it could be anybody from anywhere. Are we going to get to do a primer on public choice theory now?
Yeah, it seems like
this is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Todd Zywicki and Jenin Younes, and we're about to talk about the fact that people in government are just regular people like the rest of us, and they don't have any superpowers, and they have the same personal interests that the rest of us do, and they may not be acting in the disinterested, what do we call it?
Public interest.
Help me out here.
The public interest, broadly defined.
So what is that? Did I capture the public theory, the public interest, public choice theory?
That's right. That's right. In fact, I teach a class on public choice in the law, and that's exactly right. And both politicians and bureaucrats have their
Give
own
us a
incentives.
better definition.
Yeah.
than
So public choice is basically the idea that people are people, and you don't magically become wiser or more selfless simply because you get elected to Congress. And so you have the same limits of information, the same limits. You're the same person intellectually and everything else. You may have different incentives. The incentives of politicians is to get elected. How do we know that? Because if they don't, then they are ex-politicians. The incentives of bureaucrats seem to be to expand their empires, their domains. Is William Niskanen, former chairman of the Cato Institute.
Well, they may be
used to talk about.
ex-politicians, but they never leave Washington.
But they never leave Washington. That's right. They just become lobbyists. And and I think Anthony Fauci is a good example of the type. I've worked twice in the federal government, and I ask people this question: it's like, what is the odds that the best immunologist in America is a senior bureaucrat in the federal government, rather than a professor at Harvard? Or making a couple $1 million a year or whatever. Basically, Anthony Fauci got to the top because he was a great bureaucrat, right? And what happened was, for decades, people sucked up to Anthony Fauci, told him how great he was, how brilliant he was. Why? Because he had billions of dollars of research money to give them, and they understood that's how the game was played.
They were giving out what, $2 billion? No, much more than that. How much research money did he have power over? He and Collins.
I don't know, billions of dollars
literally
a year, right? And so, for decades, all they heard was people telling him how brilliant they were, right? And he just kept aggregating more and more power to himself. And pretty soon, these guys just, feel like they run the world. And so Collins and Fauci will get together and basically say, we're going to do a hit job on Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff. And they're, completely frank about it. It's like, we've got to take these guys out.
We deposed Anthony Fauci the day before Thanksgiving in 2022, and he was asked about that, and he said, we were just talking about writing an article to explain why they were wrong.
just interested academics wanted to do another research paper.
Yeah, exactly. And he kept saying he didn't have time. He was asked about his involvement in the social media censorship, and he kept saying he didn't have time for social media because he was running a $6 billion institute. So I think that's the number.
$6 billion, that's right.
Billion. Well, so what the related issues are that we've chilled speech, not with just regard to the whole COVID issue, but nobody's allowed to talk about the 2020 election.
Right.
And I guess now 2022 is, nobody mentions it, whether that was all kosher, we don't know. January 6th, we haven't been able to talk about. It's an insurrection. 6 police officers were killed, where in fact nobody was killed. But Tucker now has videos. Have you been following that? Where
I just saw the news on that.
They've got how many hundreds of thousands of hours of videos?
14,000 hours or something.
Wow.
I saw part in the paper today. Yeah.
So, any
and I think
on that?
and what I think it's the scope of this continues to expand. I think is your point, which is once the government gets a hold of a lever like this, gets a hold of a power like this, then they expand. And you forgot one of the big ones, of course, was the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to the last election, when the FBI Mark Zuckerberg admitted, went to Facebook and said, "You guys look out for Russian disinformation coming down the pike." And of course, we all know what happened to the New York Post there. And not being able to spread that story, which of course is another example of something that's true. And this bill is where this really becomes urgent. And you ask the question, are these just private companies? Yes, they're just private companies, but they're special private companies. And this is what we need to start thinking about, which is that if this affects the democratic process. This affects our power as citizens. If we can't speak as citizens without the risk of losing our job, losing our bank account, losing our Twitter account, right? Now you've really got private companies leveraging power over the democratic process. And so this is what I think that those of us who believe in free speech need to, and private property need to understand is there are spillover effects here, that there are spillover effects on the democratic process when Twitter, a private company, decides to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story, most obviously, could affect the election. But all of these questions we're having now with respect to vaccine policy, with respect to other questions of public import.
Well, the big issue for me is that it's not what people are saying, it's what people are afraid to say. They
Right.
won't say. And increasingly, you get people not willing to say what they think. The chilling effect. I think you've got lawyers who even got a legal term for it. But
Right.
it's, that's the thing we've really got to fear, is that people are not offering up what they really think.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. I mean, those who think cancel culture is no big deal, show me the people who have been canceled. That's the point, right? Every time they do this, it has a deterrent effect. It's the person who won't say something because they're afraid of getting canceled. So that person never gets canceled because they don't say it. And so we see this on university campuses, for example, which is maybe, a controversial speaker comes to campus, creates a big uproar. Maybe that person ends up coming, but the next time that student group, that conservative student group, or the Federalist Society, whoever is thinking about inviting that person, they say it's not worth it, right? And so then they invite a less inflammatory speaker, right? So it's what you don't see that happens, what's not said, the speaker who's not invited. Those, I think, are the that's the unmeasurable but highly crucial and important part of what this chilling effect has on people's free speech.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with respect to whether the tech companies should be able to do what they want, I would say that's one of the most divisive topics in the libertarian community.
Well, let's talk
now,
about 230.
Yeah.
Let's do 230, because first, could we do a quick explanation of what 230 is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it essentially, insofar as it bears on this issue, it protects the companies from liability for what people publish on their platforms. So they can't be held responsible if somebody, posts a threat and then, or something defamatory. I don't know if you have anything to add. But.
Yeah, and so the
Section 230 of the Federal Communication Act of 1978, 1986, something like that.
86 somewhere.
And it was
Yeah.
put in place when these tech companies had about $8 million in revenue total.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were operating these bulletin boards, electronic bulletin boards, and nobody thought it would really amount to much, but they wanted to protect these little companies from getting sued by people for what they'd put on the platform.
And so, interestingly enough, though, you'll since you're a financial services guy like me, you'll remember this background. What the first case that triggered all this was involved commentary on an early board involving stock tips, and Stratton Oakmont.
Oh my goodness, isn't that the movie?
That's the movie, The Wolf of Wall Street. Somebody went on one of these platforms and said, Stratton Oakmont is a bunch of fraudsters. They're ripping you off. And Stratton Oakmont sued, as I recall the facts, I may be a little off in the details. Stratton Oakmont sued and said, those people are libeling us, and wanted to hold the platform liable. Well, it turns out, obviously, that was true. And so they put this provision in that would protect the media companies for things that people said on their platform, right? With the exception that they could remove things like true threats, child pornography, right? Illegal acts like, I wanted to sell you a pound of heroin or whatever.
So
and that's the
but
core
that
of what it
imposed
is.
an obligation on them to remove bad stuff, and then that morphed into.
Right.
Well, it's not clear whether it imposed an obligation on them or I think what it did was create a safe harbor. If they said, we're removing this because we consider it to be dangerous, to be a threat, or to be illegal. And that's what they're standing behind now, is they're saying, well, that little thing, there was a carve out, the safe harbor for that, allows us also to remove things like COVID misinformation, right?
Masks don't work.
Masks don't work, right? Because that's dangerous, right? It's a public, it's creating a public danger. And so that's where the line comes in. But what I think is important about it, Bill, is that traditional exemption is Exactly. That's basically how the First Amendment is structured. Right? The First Amendment allows, you're not allowed to falsely cry fire in a crowded theater. You're not allowed to facilitate, engage in a criminal conspiracy and say you've got a First Amendment right to plot somebody's, murder.
Or post-child porn.
Or post-child porn or whatever, right? That's what they were getting at with that. It looks like to me that doesn't apply to just a broad-ranging thing to say, well, that comment you made is dangerous because it means people won't wear masks.
Well, it looks like the Supreme Court, based on the oral arguments, isn't going to weigh in on this. Doesn't it look like they're going to send it back to Congress, at which point nothing happens?
I've not looked at the oral argument transcript yet.
Okay, well, you guys have been too busy.
I
last year.
had a brief due yesterday. So
Okay, well,
wasn't listening.
That's right, but it is a thicket, and I think Jenin puts her finger on it, which is this is a real dividing line within sort of libertarian and conservatives right now, right? Which is what do we do about this, right? What do we do about treating these things as platforms when they're acting
leaning libertarian personally, I would opt for more speech, and I don't really care if it gets regular, but I think conservatives, they want to weigh in on certain types of speech as well.
Well, so there are laws in Texas and Florida that basically said that the platforms can't censor people. They can get in trouble for
based
censoring
on content,
based on viewpoint or content. So the federal court in Florida struck the law down and said it was unconstitutional. The federal court in Texas came to the opposite conclusion and basically said that these platforms are common carriers. They're like telephone companies or railroads, and you can't discriminate. There are laws saying that common carriers can't discriminate against certain groups of people. Like the railroad can't kick you off because you're black or gay or whatever. Same thing. The platforms can't kick you, according to this law, the platforms can't kick you off because you express unpopular views or views that differ from the government's. And I would say I'm sympathetic to the argument. I'm also a little wary of more laws and regulation because that just allows the government to get involved in everything. So I'm personally conflicted, and I think a lot of, there's a lot of division within them, libertarianism and conservatism.
So part of our problem is we can't make up our own law.
right? Well, and I,
We do know we don't need another law to tell us what's
right. But and there's two ways you could get at this, right? You could try to get rid of 230, which is, I think, probably not the best way to do it because I think these platforms are really marvelous in the ability of people to be able to speak.
Won't they
and that
then
sort of thing.
not let people just post all
That
very
would
easily
be,
because
I think
they'll get too worried?
that's my intuition.
Yeah.
But what they could do is Jenin was saying, like they did in Texas, which is they say, if you're going to be a platform, you've got to be open to all comers. And so the common carrier approach is exactly the right approach. She gave the example of a railroad, but think about this. The post office, most people don't know, the post office is a private company, right? The United States Postal Service is actually a private company. It's got a .com email address, not a .gov email address. But the post office cannot refuse to deliver a Nazi pamphlet, for example, right? The post office can't say, we don't want to facilitate the speech of Nazis or communists or whatever the case may be. And that's basically what the argument here would be, is that social media companies, like the post office, have this special, and then the post office also has a safe harbor if they deliver something from A to B that doesn't get people in trouble.
Well, the post office is a private company, but the American taxpayers are the equity holder. And we never get asked about whether we want a dividend or return of capital. We just keep putting more in.
Just keep putting more
As
in.
a venture capitalist, that dog, anyway.
And so that's what Jenin means by being a common carrier, which is it unreasonable to say that you have to deliver Nazi speech on Twitter just like you do for, communist speech or whatever. And that doesn't strike me as inherently objectionable.
Well, but I just want to come back to reestablish that what the White House was doing and what Fauci was doing and what the FBI was doing, putting their people in, coercing these social media companies to do their bidding. That seems to me that's a bright line. I mean, we can talk about all these other things, but that seems wrong.
Yes. I mean, I very strongly believe this is a really significant First Amendment violation, and probably the most important First Amendment issue of our time, I think, because in the digital age, if the government, if this comes out the wrong way and the courts say the government can basically coerce, pressure, encourage, even work with private industry to accomplish what it can't do directly, then the First Amendment is really dead, in reality.
Exactly.
In the counter argument that some conservatives have made is, well, the government has First Amendment rights too.
No.
Right?
But they can't.
Who are these people? Name names.
You can probably guess. But they say, well, the government's allowed to tell you what they think. They're allowed to criticize you if you,
Power
this
has
and
the
the other.
ability to tax us to death and put us in jail.
But
But that's a little
that's
different.
my
That's a
view.
little different. With that kind of power comes responsibilities, and one of the responsibilities is to withhold from that kind of behavior, refrain.
I would agree.
That would be Judge
And we
Walton's view.
last time I was here, Bill, we talked about cancel culture in banking, where they're doing the same sort of thing, using this vague concept of reputation risk to get banks. First it was Operation Choke Point, but now it's to get banks to debank gun companies, to debank oil companies.
Well,
to
the big
debank
one's fossil
individuals.
fuels.
Fossil
That's-
fuels.
I mean,
exactly.
they would love. They're using banks to promote the environment, the climate change agenda.
Right. And it's walking
And the
along this
SEC.
same line that these
Yeah.
guys are doing, right? Which is they're saying, well, we're not telling you have to do it. We're going to just say it's risky, right?
I think the best analogy comes from a lot of cases, the Fourth Amendment cases, that's, searches and seizures, where the government can't hire a private company or encourage or coerce them to go search your home without a warrant. So likewise, why should the government be able to do those things, with respect to censoring people based on viewpoint?
Right.
If people in government got up and said, private companies should really go break into people's homes and try to find evidence of crimes, we would all agree that's not the First Amendment right that government officials have.
And this was the logic of the old Ku Klux Klan Act, right? Which is the government couldn't terrorize black people in the South, and they couldn't say, well, we're not going to be. They can't just say not in a wink. Well, if you private actors terrorize black people, we might just decide not to investigate, right?
Hey, I want to go into one. We've got time for another segment here, and I want to. This is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Jenin, Younes, and Todd Zywicki, and we're talking about really the arcana of how and whether we can manage the speech on social media. It's an important issue. But I want to talk about life on Twitter. You both are very active on Twitter, and we've had some regime change at Twitter. And so, let me open with that. Who wants to go first? Life on Twitter.
Well, it's really weird. So Elon Musk took over, and I think his goal was to make it a real free speech haven. Weirdly, my engagement has gone down. I don't know. I was certain that I was being shadow banned, meaning that my account was sort of being deplatformed because I say all sorts of controversial things about COVID. But I have far fewer impressions and likes. But my follower count is rapidly going up. So I don't know. I don't understand what's going on.
Your followers are going up, but the number of impressions are going down.
Exactly. It's really strange.
Is that because he's getting rid of the bots?
But that would mean the follower count would go down, I would think.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
I think it's a fascinating ecosystem, Bill. I'm slightly older than Jenin, so I'm later uptake to this social media stuff. And I didn't start actually tweeting until I brought my lawsuit in 2021. And basically what happened was I published an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it got edited down so much they cut out a bunch of my citations. So I just said, well, I'll just put it up on Twitter, right? And it kind of went from there because nobody else was saying what I was saying. So here's my observation, which is first, when I post commentary, and I post almost exclusively on Twitter, not on Facebook. Why? Because Facebook engages in ruthless shadow banning, which is that I don't know exactly how their algorithm works. They don't tell you it's working. But basically anything I publish on Facebook does not get read if it's on anything related to COVID. It just goes into some black hole.
So you can
somewhere.
still find it, but
I
you
can
can
find
find it,
it,
but nobody else
But
can
nobody
find
else
It
can
doesn't
see it.
appear,
It doesn't
yeah.
appear in anybody else's
Quick
feed. So
definition of shadow banning.
basically, they suppress, they dampen the ability for it to feed into other people to see it. And so they've got basically a dial, And
Is
so
that
if
an algorithm or
Yeah.
is that a human being?
it's an algorithm, I think, primarily.
Yeah, but I think you could be identified by humans, and then they make sure that the algorithm deplatforms you. So like Jay Bhattacharya, who we talked about earlier, was shadow banned from his first day on Twitter. So somebody like saw he joined Twitter because he did that about a year ago, and then they said like he was put on a blacklist, so his tweets aren't seen as much as other people's.
Yeah, and so they have this ability to highlight or depress certain certain postings that people have. And so in my case, when I would post on COVID stuff, at some point they just basically said, nobody's gonna see this, right? And so at least I understood. So basically, if nobody's gonna read it, so then I switched over to Twitter, which is arbitrary in its own way, right? But they would just ban people. And so what I will say is Twitter's a lot more fun now that Elon Musk is there and we don't have this.
How's it more fun?
It just feels more fun. People can say more things. People have been reinstated who were long gone, right? It's just a little more freewheeling and doesn't feel quite as constricted to me. That might just be psychological. But what I would say is if people have been putting off joining Twitter because they think it's sort of, a communist, Stasi-controlled site, join Twitter now. Even if you just read, it's a heck of a lot more
Donald
fun.
to rejoin Twitter?
I think Donald probably doesn't need encouragement, but it really is a fascinating, and this is why it is so powerful, right? It really is the vehicle for bypassing the elite media. It really is the vehicle for hearing directly from people you want to hear from without them having to go through the gatekeepers of the traditional media, whether it's Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, or people who are flakier, right? And this is why the left fears it so much, because it allows people to evade the gatekeepers in the media and the government and the universities and the big corporations and everybody else that they have control over.
Well, on the left and among the elite media, Elon Musk has become almost as bad as Donald Trump.
Yeah.
It's really funny how they just pick up on someone, decide they're the devil, and then
And he used
everybody
to
goes
be the
along
hero,
with it.
right? He was saving the planet.
Yeah, I see him as a hero, but he's been really eviscerated.
Oh yeah.
But it's really quite remarkable, Bill, is that, I don't have a huge number of followers. Jenin has a lot, right? But somebody like Jenin or a larger follower could be seen millions of times on Twitter. And millions of people will see it all around the world. By contrast, CNN, an average show on CNN gets, a couple 100,000 viewers? The reach of these platforms is mind-boggling.
Unless it's Don Lemon talking about women.
Yeah.
I have to watch that clip. I still haven't seen it.
That's right.
Anyway, but you're right.
Yeah, but the point is this really is a very powerful thing. And this is what Elon Musk, and I give Elon Musk credit, which is that Elon Musk saw this and said, I don't know whether I'm going to make any money off of this, but this is really important for society that we have a place where this can be done. That place used to be universities, and everybody knows it's not universities anymore. Yeah. And Twitter and social media in theory is the last place where people can theoretically speak freely and evade these gatekeepers.
Right.
You say some very blunt things on Twitter. What's your subjective experience of this? I know we talked about your numbers, but how do you feel about the experience now versus a year ago?
It's much better. So, I mean, I think one thing a lot of people don't necessarily realize is how important it is, although Todd just got to the heart of that. It's also important for my job. I tell people what I'm doing. They're interested. That helps my organization and me continue to do the work. So I really didn't want to lose my account, but people were being censored so much for saying anything critical about the vaccines or anything good about natural immunity. I was afraid, so I got creative.
So you had the chilling cloud hovering over what you're
chilling.
saying.
Yeah,
I got to stay on this. And
yeah, no, I really didn't want to lose my account. And at some point they were suspending people so much. This was actually right around the time the Biden administration started threatening the companies, which I think is further evidence that the companies were reacting to that. But yeah, I really didn't want to lose my account. So I would say things like, here's an article about the vaccines, you should read it.
Yeah.
Because it said things like, the vaccines don't stop transmission or something, because I was afraid to actually say it. So it's really refreshing to not have to. I don't worry about it anymore, because they're not enforcing their COVID misinformation policy under Elon. He said that explicitly they're not doing it. Now the government is using that to say that our cases are moot, which is what happens when there's the conduct you're complaining of has ceased. So they're saying that, well, Elon Musk did away with the COVID misinformation policy, so your plaintiffs have nothing to complain about. In one of my cases, Missouri is broader, but my Chengizi case is just Twitter. So we're over dealing with that.
We got a couple minutes left. So where are things now? I mean, we've now seen these shocking reports of the Twitter offices housing all these FBI agents and all the other stuff we've been talking about. Has all this disclosure changed anything? Is the government backing off, or do we still think they're doing it in maybe a less obvious way?
I doubt they're backing off. I mean, I can't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes right now, but in the middle of the Missouri lawsuit, when some of this really big information came out, the current press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was going back on during her press conferences and saying, we have our eye on Elon Musk and Twitter, and if he's not censoring misinformation, we're going to be doing something about it.
Is she a dim bulb or is she a dim bulb?
She's a dim bulb. Yeah. So I don't think they care at all. They're very brazen.
Yeah, they are, and I think there's an important lesson here, right? Which is, first, I agree with Jenin that this line of cases that they're pursuing right now is the most important First Amendment cases of our generation and for the future, precisely because in the world of the regulatory state, this ability of the government to have so many different ways to exercise influence over supposedly private companies is really powerful. And everybody knows it's in the background, right? And a lot of times they don't even hide it. They're just, rattling their saber over banks and that sort of thing. And so figuring out and coming up with a way of the First Amendment preventing the government from end running the protections for free speech, essentially doing like the Ku Klux Klan Act and basically, empowering and sort of encouraging private actors to do the government's bidding. That is a really important precedent here, and especially important because we can't get our hands around the regulatory state. And what we're hearing here from them, the rationales are really scary, which is they say, well, this is just good for the public if we do this. We don't allow people to have misinformation about our policies. You know who else said that? Was Vladimir Putin when he was censoring people in Russia because they were undermining faith in the war effort against Ukraine. He's like, they're spreading misinformation about our war effort in Ukraine, and so as a result, we're going to keep them from speaking. And so that's the first part. The second thing is, I think we need to think more creatively, not just about using the First Amendment as a shield, which is a very important shield, but to think more about the kind of things we've been kind of weaving into, which is common carrier regulation, things like that, where we can actually affirmatively promote free speech rather than constantly be responding to what the government's doing here.
But when do we have the power to do that? I mean, when Jenin wins her case, we're going to win that in the next 6 months, we hope.
Well, that's just a preliminary injunction. The whole case will probably take years.
So we may be into another administration. So we're going to need a new administration to make these kind of changes.
Yeah, and so last time I was here again, Bill, we talked about the fair access to financial services rule in banking, for example.
It's getting worse.
Yeah, which
It's getting much worse.
Prohibit banks from discriminating against fossil fuels, discriminating against gun companies, discriminating against individuals based on anything other than financial risk. Do I like that? No. Do I think it might be necessary? It might be, because it's clear the banks aren't going to police themselves on this, and it's clear that the government is probably doing the same thing to the banks. We know during the Obama administration they did exactly to the banks what the government is doing here under Operation Choke Point.
And it's
so,
much less easy. It's much less easy to detect that.
And it's much less easy to detect that because of the supervision process. They basically took that model, moved it over here to social media, and they're going to, I think, keep pushing the boundary if they think they can get political elements out of this. And if we're constantly having to bring lawsuits to stop them over and over again, that's not that effective.
So we got to wrap up. What didn't we get a chance to talk about that we need to talk about next time?
Well, we didn't talk about the California misinformation law, which I think is important because
Which
what happens. That was California passed a law recently saying that doctors should be disciplined for spreading misinformation about COVID to patients, and misinformation is very poorly
Okay,
defined.
so we'll put that on our list.
Yeah.
That's one. What else do we do? We got to talk about the banks. It's just not the banks, it's the whole financial services industry.
That's right. It's financial services. It's these guys. And I think it's a model that if it's allowed to stand here, it's a model that's going to spread.
That's right, yeah.
Is if the government realizes that there's a line here and the line's out here, they push right up to that line.
Is your group doing anything in financial services?
Not that I can think of at the moment off the top of my head. There could be something, but
Because
we
the
have a lot of
game's
lawsuits.
afoot. I mean, the administrative state's very active at the Fed, for example, where they want to create central bank digital currencies.
Yeah,
And talk about coercion. I mean, your bank account's going to be at the Fed.
yeah. So I don't think so. We have some lawsuits against the student loan handout, the $10,000 or whatever. But that's
Good.
not exactly what you're getting at.
But that gets straight to the social credit questions that we're all nervous about.
Okay, there's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
And there'll be a next time. This is too chock full with good stuff, or at least sobering stuff. So this has been the Bill Walton Show, and I've been here with Jenin Younes and Todd Zywicki, and we've been talking about Missouri v. Biden, which is the opportunity to rein in the White House's coercion through social media companies. And anyway, thanks you guys for joining, and also thank you all for joining. And as usual, you can find us on all the major podcast platforms. YouTube, I think, unless we get banned this time. The last one got banned. We may be pulled, but hello, YouTube. And Rumble, and we're on Substack, and also on CPAC now on Monday nights. And so join us then, and send us your comments via either Substack or the website, thebillwaltonshow.com. We pay a lot of attention to what you're interested in, what we're hearing us talk about, and we'll follow up accordingly. So anyway, thanks for joining, and talk soon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.